Hello, wildlings. I'm your Creep Smith, and you found my Fear Forge. Lucky you. Hi there, wildlings. Do you have something that you just love to do? What would you trade to be better at what you do? What would you trade to be rich and famous in recognition of that skill? In tonight's start of a series, we begin to look into the world of someone who decided that he'd trade anything, including his own soul. Part 1 in an attempt at reading of one of the stories from his 1984 collection Books of Blood, tonight's thaumaturgical terror tale is The Last Illusion by master storyteller Clive Barker. What happened then, when the magician, having mesmerized the caged tiger, pulled the tasseled cord that released a dozen swords upon its head, was the subject of heated argument both in the bar of the theater and later when Swann's performance was over on the sidewalk of 51st Street. Some claim to have glimpsed the bottom of the cage opening in the split second that all other eyes were on the descending blades, and seen the tiger swiftly spirited away as the woman in the red dress took its place behind the lacquered bars. Others were just as adamant that the animal had never been in the cage to begin with, its presence merely a projection which had been extinguished as a mechanism propelled the woman from beneath the stage. This, of course, at such speed that it deceived the eye of all but those swift and suspicious enough to catch it. And the swords, the nature of the trick which had transformed them in the mere seconds of their gleaming descent from steel to rose petals, was yet further fuel for debate. The explanations ranged from the prosaic to the elaborate, but few of the throng that left the theater lacked some theory, nor did the arguments finish there on the sidewalk. They raged on, no doubt, in the apartments and restaurants of New York. The pleasure to be had from Swann's illusion was, it seemed, twofold. First, the spectacle of the trick itself, in the breathless moment when disbelief was, if not suspended, at least taken on tiptoe, and second, when the moment was over and logic restored in the debate as to how the trick had been achieved. "How do you do it, Mr. Swann?" Barbara Bernstein was eager to know. "It's magic," Swann replied. He had invited her backstage to examine the tiger's cage for any sign of fakery in its construction. She had found none. She had examined the swords. They were lethal, and the petals fragrant. Still, she insisted. "Yes, but really," she leaned in close to him. "You can tell me," she said. "I promise. I won't breathe a word to a soul." He returned her a slow smile in place of a reply. "Oh, I know," she said. "You're going to tell me that you've signed some kind of oath or promise." "That's right," Swann said. "And you're forbidden to give away any trade secrets." "The intention is to give you pleasure," he told her. "Have I failed in that?" "Oh no," she replied without a moment's hesitation. "Everybody's talking about the show. You're the toast of New York." "No," he protested. "Truly," she said. "I know people who would give their eye teeth to get into this theater. And to have a guided tour backstage, well, I'll be the envy of everybody." "I'm very pleased," he said, and touched her face. She had clearly been anticipating such a move on his part. It would be something else for her to boast of, her seduction by the man critics had dubbed the Magus of Manhattan. "I'd like to make love to you," he whispered to her. "Here?" she said. "No," he told her. "Not within earshot of the tigers." She laughed, preferring her lover's 20 years Swann's junior. He looked, someone had observed, like a man in mourning for his profile. But his touch promised what no boy could offer. She liked the tang of dissoluto she sensed beneath his gentlemanly facade. Swann was a dangerous man. If she turned him down, she might never find another like him. "We could go to a hotel," she suggested. "A hotel," he said, "is a good idea." A look of doubt had crossed her face. "What about your wife?" she said. "We might be seen." He took her hand. "Shall we be invisible then? I'm serious." "So am I," he insisted. "Take it from me, seeing is not believing. I should know. It's the cornerstone of my profession." She didn't look much reassured. "If anyone recognizes us," he told her, "I'll simply tell them that their eyes are playing tricks." She smiled at this, and he kissed her. She returned the kiss with unquestionable fervor. "Miraculous," he said when their mouths parted. "Shall we go, before the tigers start to gossip?" He led her across the stage. The cleaners had not yet gone about their business, and there, lying on the boards, was a litter of rosebuds. Some had been trampled, a few had not. Swann took his hand from hers and walked across to where the flowers lay. She watched him stoop and pluck a rose from the ground, enchanted by the gesture, but before he could stand upright again, something in the air above him caught her eye. She looked up, and her gaze met a slice of silver that was even now plunging towards him. She made to warn him, but the sword was quicker than her tongue. At the last possible moment, he seemed to sense the danger he was in and looked around, the bud in his hand, as the point met his back. The sword's momentum carried it through his body to the hilt. Blood fled from his chest and splashed on the floor. He made no sound, but fell forward, forcing 2/3 of the sword's length out of his body again as he hit the stage. She would have screamed, but that her attention was claimed by a sound from the clutter of magical apparatus arrayed in the wings behind her, a muttered growl which was indisputably the voice of a tiger. She froze. There were probably instructions on how best to stare down rogue tigers, but as a Manhattanite born and bred, they were techniques she was not acquainted with. "Swann," she said, hoping that this might yet be some Baroque illusion staged purely for her benefit. "Swann, please get up." But the magician only lay where he'd fallen, the pool spreading from beneath him. "If this is a joke," she said testily, "I am not amused." When he didn't rise to her remark, she tried a sweeter tactic. "Swann, my sweet, I'd like to go now if you don't mind." The growl came again. She didn't want to turn and seek out its source, but equally she did not want to be sprung upon from behind by a tiger. Cautiously she looked around. The wings were in darkness. The clutter of properties kept her from working out the precise location of the beast. She could still hear it, however, its tread, its growl. Step by step she retreated towards the apron of the stage. The closed curtains sealed her off from the auditorium, but she hoped she might scramble under them before the tiger reached her. As she backed against the heavy fabric, one of the shadows in the wings forsook its ambiguity, and the animal appeared. It was not beautiful as she had thought it when behind bars. It was vast and lethal and hungry. She went down on her haunches and reached for the hem of the curtain. The fabric was heavily weighted, and she had more difficulty lifting it than she had expected, but she had managed to slide halfway under the drape when, head and hands pressed to the boards, she sensed the thump of the tiger's advance. An instant later she felt the splash of its breath upon her bare back and screamed as it hooked its talons into her body and hauled her from the sight of safety towards the steaming jaws. Even then she refused to give up her life. She kicked at it and tore out fur in handfuls and delivered a hail of punches to its snout, but her resistance was negligible in the face of such authority. Her assault, for all its ferocity, did not slow the beast a jot. It ripped open her body with one casual clout. Mercifully, with that first wound, her senses gave up all claim to verisimilitude and instead took to preposterous invention. It seemed to her that she heard applause from somewhere and the roar of an approving audience, and in that place of the blood that was surely springing from her body, there came fountains of sparkling light. The agony her nerve endings were suffering didn't touch her at all. Even when the animal had divided into 3 or 4 parts, her head lay on its side at the edge of the stage and watched as her torso was mauled and her limbs devoured. And all the while, when she wondered how all this could be possible, that her eyes could live to witness this Last Supper, the only reply that she could think of was Swann's. "It's magic," he'd said. Indeed, she was thinking that very thing, that this must be magic, when the tiger ambled across to her head and swallowed it down in one bite. Amongst a certain set, Harry D'Amour liked to believe that he had some small reputation, a coterie which did not, alas, include his ex-wife, his creditors, or those anonymous critics who regularly posted dog excrement through his office letterbox. But the woman who was on the phone right now, her voice so full of grief she might have been crying for half a year, and was about to begin again, she knew him for the paragon that he was. "I need your help, Mr. D'Amour, very badly." "I'm busy on several cases at the moment," he told her. "Maybe you could come to the office?" "I can't leave the house," the woman informed him. "I'll explain everything. Please come." He was sorely tempted, but there were several outstanding cases, one of which, if not solved soon, might end in fratricide. He suggested she try elsewhere. "I can't go to just anybody," the woman stated. "Why me?" "I read about you, about what happened in Brooklyn." Making mention of his most conspicuous failure was not the surest method of securing his services, Harry thought. But it certainly got his attention. What had happened in Wyckoff Street had begun innocently enough with a husband who'd employed him to spy upon his adulterous wife, and had ended at the top story of the Lomax house with the world he thought he'd known turning inside out. When the body count was done and the surviving priests had been dispatched, he was left with fear of stairs and more questions than he'd ever answer this side of the family plot. He took no pleasure in being reminded of those terrors. "I don't like to talk about Brooklyn," he said. "Forgive me," the woman replied, "but I needed somebody who has experience with the occult." She stopped speaking for a moment. He could still hear her breathe down the line, soft but erratic. "I need you," she said. He had already decided in that pause, when only her fear had been audible, what reply he would make. "I'll come." "I'm grateful to you," she said. "The house is on East 61st Street. He scribbled down the details. Her last words were, "Please hurry." Then she put down the phone. He made some calls in the vain hope of placating two of his more excitable clients, then pulled on his jacket, locked the office, and started downstairs. The landing and the lobby smelled pungent. As he reached the front door, he caught Chaplin, the janitor, emerging from the basement. "This place stinks," he told the man. "It's disinfectant." "It's cat piss," Harry said. "Get something done about it, will you? I've got a reputation to protect." He left the man laughing. A grieving widow, a PI, 2 deaths, and a mystery. Not to mention a slightly gassy tiger and several dozen unknowns. As they say, well begun is half done. If this intrigues you, please join us in our next, more substantial dip into good Mr. D'Amour's doings as we continue his anxious adventure. Stay scary, wildlings. Always lock down your props lest they bite you, and make the most of your nights.